After a heated argument, my son had left me stranded at a bus stop, without a single cent. A soft voice whispered nearby, "Pretend you're my wife. My driver is on his way. Your son will regret leaving you like this." The afternoon sun blazed down mercilessly as I watched Daniel's car vanish around the corner. The screech of tires on asphalt felt like the final punctuation to our fight. At 67, I never imagined I would stand abandoned at a bus stop, my own son's anger propelling him away. "I'm not a child, Daniel," I had told him, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay calm. "I don't need you to manage my life as if I were helpless." His reply was predictably dismissive. "Mom, you're being unreasonable. That senior living facility is perfect. They have activities, medical staff, everything you could need." "Everything except my independence," I countered. He had slammed the brakes without warning. "Fine. If you're so independent, figure out your own way home. Maybe then you'll realize how much help you actually need." Only after his car disappeared did I fully grasp my predicament. My purse, wallet, bus pass, still sat on the kitchen counter where I had left it in the chaos of leaving. My phone, the one I'd snatched up at the last second, blinked a pitiful 3% battery remaining. A wave of humiliation burned my cheeks. A woman of my age, left alone, powerless. 5 years a widow, 30 years a literature teacher, and now reduced to this. Stranded by the one person who should have understood that confining me to a sterile retirement facility would crush me faster than any illness ever could. The bus stop bench offered little solace to my arthritic hip. Walking home was an option, 4 miles at least, but exhausting. Borrowing a phone from a stranger would demand swallowing my pride. And who could I even call? Friends my age who still drove wouldn't see a message for hours. Calling Daniel? Out of the question. Lost in thought, I barely noticed when someone sat beside me until a calm, cultured male voice broke the silence. "Pardon me, but I couldn't help overhearing your situation." I turned to see a man in his early 70s, impeccably dressed, dark sunglasses shielding his eyes, a white cane leaning against the bench. He exuded a quiet elegance, what my late husband would have called old money style, a perfectly tailored light gray suit that somehow seemed comfortable despite the heat. "I'm fine, really," I said automatically, my embarrassment seeping into my voice. How much had he heard? A faint smile touched his lips. "I may be blind, but my hearing is excellent. Your son left you here without making sure you had a way home. That seems inconsiderate." There was something in his candid assessment that bypassed my defenses. "That's one word for it," I admitted. "Another would be cruel." He leaned slightly closer. "Pretend you're my wife," he murmured. "My driver is on the way. Your son will regret leaving you like this." I blinked, stunned by the unexpected offer. I couldn't possibly. "I'm Robert Wilson," he said smoothly, extending his hand with perfect precision. "And you are?" "Martha Collins," I replied, taking his hand. Warm. Firm. Reassuring. "Well, Martha Collins, I'm offering you a dignified solution to an undignified predicament. No strings attached." He tilted his head, a subtle self-deprecating grin in his tone. "Unless you're uncomfortable accepting help from a blind old man." Despite everything, I smiled. "Being blind doesn't make you incapable, Mr. Wilson. And being older doesn't make me incapable, despite what my son thinks." He laughed, a rich, genuine sound that creased the corners of his eyes above the dark glasses. "Touché, Mrs. Collins. Then we understand each other." Before I could respond, a sleek black car pulled up. A distinguished-looking man, perhaps my age, stepped out and approached us. "Right on time, James," Robert said, gathering his cane. "We'll be giving Mrs. Collins a ride home today." If James thought this unusual, he didn't show it. "Of course, sir," he said, nodding briefly toward me. As James guided Robert to the car, I hesitated. Caution had governed my life, getting into cars with strangers was not a habit I indulged. Yet, as my phone gave its final, pitiful beep and died in my pocket, I made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. "Thank you," I said, letting James open the rear door. Inside, the car smelled faintly of leather and subtle cologne. Cool air washed over me. "Where are we going, Mrs. Collins?" Robert asked, settling beside me. I gave my address, my modest East Side apartment, the one I'd moved into after selling our family home following Frank's death. "Actually," Robert said after a moment, "I hope you'll allow me to offer tea first. My home is nearby, and after such an eventful afternoon, you might appreciate a moment to collect yourself before heading home." The polite answer would have been to decline. Instead, I considered my apartment, the empty rooms, the echo of Daniel's frustrated voice, the weight of the day's humiliation pressing down on me. "That would be lovely," I found myself saying. As we drove through increasingly upscale neighborhoods, I studied Robert Wilson more closely. His silver hair was perfectly trimmed, his hands manicured yet strong. His blindness seemed to have done nothing to diminish his commanding presence. There was something almost theatrical in the precision of his movements, the way he turned his head when I spoke, how his expression seemed to match my tone exactly. "If you're wondering whether you've made a terrible mistake accepting a ride from a stranger," he said suddenly, as if reading my thoughts, "I assure you, James has an impeccable driving record, and I am far too old and respectable to be dangerous." I chuckled despite myself. I was actually thinking, "You seem remarkably well adjusted for someone who can't see." He smiled faintly. "Ah. One adapts, or one becomes bitter." I chose the former. When the car finally passed through an ornate gate and curved up a long driveway, I couldn't suppress a gasp. Robert Wilson's home was nothing short of a mansion. A stunning colonial revival, its grounds perfectly manicured, stretching in every direction. "Welcome to my humble abode," Robert said, a trace of irony in his voice. "I hope you like Earl Grey." James helped us from the car, and I found myself momentarily speechless. The mansion rose 3 stories, its symmetrical facade adorned with elegant columns and expansive windows catching the late afternoon sun. Flower beds bloomed in carefully arranged patterns, and in the distance I could hear the gentle splash of a fountain. "Your silence suggests either admiration or reconsidering the wisdom of having tea with a stranger," Robert commented as we approached the front entrance. "It's a bit overwhelming," I admitted. "You didn't mention living in a palace." His lips quirked upward. "Hardly a palace, though I suppose it is large for one person and a small staff. The family has owned it for generations. I find comfort in familiar surroundings, particularly since losing my sight." As James opened the massive front door, I noticed something curious. Despite Robert's blindness, there were no special accommodations, no textured pathways, no braille signs, nothing. The house was simply exquisite, designed for aesthetic appreciation. "The house doesn't seem particularly adapted for," I hesitated. "For a blind man," Robert finished for me. "I prefer beauty over practicality. I've memorized every inch of this place. 15 years without sight teaches one to map spaces efficiently." We entered a foyer with soaring ceilings and a grand staircase curling upward like something from a classic film. A crystal chandelier cast rainbow prisms across the marble floors. "We'll take tea in the garden room," Robert told James. "And perhaps some of those lemon biscuits Mrs. Chen made yesterday." "Very good, sir," James replied, disappearing down a hallway. Robert offered his arm with surprising precision. "Shall we? The garden room offers a pleasant view of the east grounds, or so I'm told." I hesitated before taking his arm, struck again by his confidence despite his blindness. As we walked through the house, I noticed subtle details, the way he occasionally trailed his fingers along surfaces, counting steps softly under his breath. The garden room proved to be a sunlit conservatory, floor-to-ceiling windows framing immaculately landscaped grounds. Comfortable wicker furniture with plush cushions created intimate seating areas among large potted plants. The space felt both grand and personal, a display of wealth without ostentation. "Please, make yourself comfortable," Robert said, gesturing toward a seat near the windows. He settled himself in an adjacent chair with practiced ease, placing his cane carefully beside him. Have you lived here long? I asked, trying to reconcile this palatial home with the man before me. All my life, he replied, with a few intervals for education and business. I've closed off portions of it since losing my sight, no point maintaining rooms I'll never see again. There was a wistfulness in his voice that touched me unexpectedly. I downsized after my husband died, I offered. Our family home felt too empty with just me rattling around in it. Frank, wasn't it? Your husband's name? I blinked in surprise. Yes. But I don't remember mentioning. You're wearing a wedding band, he said smoothly. And you referred to yourself as Mrs. Collins, not Mississippi Plus. You mentioned your son. I made an educated guess. Was it a long marriage? 42 years, I replied. High school sweethearts, if you can believe such a cliché. He was an engineer. A heart attack took him 5 years ago. My condolences. A significant loss, Robert said softly. James returned then, bearing a tea service fit for royalty, delicate china, gleaming silver pieces, and an assortment of small sandwiches and biscuits arranged on tiered trays. Will there be anything else, sir? James asked, placing everything neatly before us. No, thank you, James. This will do perfectly. Robert waited until James departed before speaking again. Now then, Martha Collins. Former teacher, literature, I would guess, from your speech patterns. Widow, mother to at least one controlling son. Tell me, why did he leave you stranded today? My hand froze midair, halfway to my teacup. Teachers have a particular way of expressing themselves, he continued, his smile gentle. Precise vocabulary, complete sentences, even in casual conversation. You mentioned being older, but not incapable, suggesting retirement. The rest I heard at the bus stop. I may be blind, but I am far from unobservant. As he poured tea with surprising dexterity, I found myself telling Robert about Daniel's increasingly insistent campaign to move me into assisted living. About how he'd arranged today's tour without consulting me, presenting it as inevitable, and how the argument in the car escalated until I demanded to be let out. You were asserting your independence, Robert nodded, and he responded by attempting to prove your dependence. Exactly, I said. The validation from this stranger was unexpectedly comforting. Daniel doesn't see the irony. He claims I can't manage on my own, then abandons me without transportation to teach me a lesson about needing help. Children often struggle to see their parents as autonomous beings, Robert observed, sipping his tea. My daughter, Sophia, went through a similar phase after my sight deteriorated. She wanted to manage everything, my medical care, my business interests, my daily routines. It took her time to understand that blindness hadn't diminished my competence. The tea was perfectly brewed, the sandwiches delicate and flavorful. As we continued talking, I felt myself relaxing in a way I hadn't in months. Robert listened attentively, connecting my experiences teaching adolescents with his own navigating the business world. I founded a technology company specializing in security systems, he explained when I asked about his career. Ironically, I can no longer see the very screens our software protects. Before I could ponder the irony further, the door opened and a striking woman in her early 40s entered. Dad, James said you had a guest. She stopped short when she saw me, surprise evident in her expression. Sophia, perfect timing, Robert said, turning his head toward her. This is Martha Collins. Martha, my daughter, Sophia Wilson. Sophia recovered quickly, extending a perfectly manicured hand. How lovely to meet you. Dad rarely entertains these days. Her tone was friendly but evaluative, her gaze briefly assessing my simple dress and practical shoes. I recognized that protective calculation, much like I had seen in Frank's elderly aunts when they visited after his retirement. Your father rescued me from a rather awkward situation, I explained, briefly recounting my abandonment at the bus stop. Something softened in Sophia's expression. That sounds exactly like something Dad would do, she said, glancing at him with a mix of exasperation and fondness. Always collecting strays. Martha is hardly a stray, Robert countered smoothly. She's a retired literature teacher with a son who needs remedial education in respecting his mother's autonomy. Sophia laughed, a genuine, warm sound that transformed her professional demeanor. Well, then, you're in good hands. Dad has strong opinions about autonomy. She checked her watch. I can't stay, board meeting in 30 minutes. Will you be at the foundation dinner tomorrow night? Wouldn't miss it, Robert replied. After Sophia departed, planting a quick kiss on her father's cheek, Robert tilted his head slightly. My daughter, he said with mock conspiracy, thinks I need constant supervision. My blindness makes her nervous even after all these years. I studied him carefully, something about his composure tugging at my curiosity. She seems lovely, protective. But that's natural. Robert set down his teacup with precision. Now, shall we arrange to get you home before your son dispatches a search party? As James drove me home, the evening shadows lengthened across the city streets. Robert insisted on accompanying me, insisting it would complete the rescue properly. We sat side by side in the luxurious back seat, close enough that I could detect the subtle scent of his cologne, something expensive and understated, with notes of sandalwood. Your son will likely be worried by now, Robert remarked as we turned onto my street. I checked my watch and sighed. It's been 3 hours since he left me. He's either frantic or still fuming. My apartment building came into view. A modest but well-kept complex, populated mostly by retirees like myself. Nothing like the palatial estate we'd just left behind, yet it was home. There's a car parked in front of your building. Dark blue sedan. A man pacing beside it, Robert observed casually. I squinted through the windshield. That's Daniel, I muttered, and then froze, turning sharply to Robert. How did you? Robert's hand found mine with unerring precision before I could finish my question. Martha, he said smoothly, would you indulge me in a small performance? Understanding dawned slowly. He wanted Daniel to witness my arrival in a chauffeur-driven luxury car, accompanied by a wealthy companion. Precisely, he said, a hint of mischief lifting the corners of his mouth. It was playful, almost youthful, a small lesson in presumptions. I should have refused. It was childish, petty even. But I thought of Daniel's dismissive tone, the way he'd driven off, leaving me stranded, absolutely certain I couldn't manage without him. What did you have in mind? I asked. Robert's plan was simple. James would open my car door with formal deference. Robert would step out, allowing me to assist him, subtly emphasizing his blindness. I would make introductions, Robert would express delight at finally meeting my son, perhaps even mention our plans for the week. Nothing explicitly false, he assured me, just enough to make Daniel reconsider his assumptions about my competence and connections. As James pulled up behind Daniel's car, I saw my son turn, his expression shifting from worry to confusion at the sight of the luxury vehicle. His eyes widened as James opened my door with a formal Mrs. Collins, carried clearly through the evening air. I stepped out, conscious of Daniel watching, and reached for Robert's arm as we'd planned. He emerged with dignified care, dark glasses in place, his hand finding mine with the practiced touch of someone who navigates the world without sight. Mom. Daniel hurried over, relief and bewilderment battling across his face. I've been calling for hours. Your phone died, I said calmly. The battery was almost gone when you left me at the bus stop. For a brief moment, he looked ashamed, his eyes flicking between me and Robert, trying to process what he was seeing. Daniel, I'd like you to meet Robert Wilson, I said with deliberate formality. Robert, my son, Daniel. A pleasure, Robert said, extending his hand toward Daniel. I've heard so much about you. Daniel shook it automatically, professional instincts kicking in despite his confusion. I can't say the same. Mom hasn't mentioned you. We only met today, I explained, watching realization wash over him as he noticed the white cane and dark glasses. After that day at the bus stop, the implication hung heavily between us. Daniel shifted uneasily. Mr. Wilson kindly offered me a ride home, and we discovered a mutual interest in early American literature. I continued smoothly. Foundation dinner? Daniel echoed. The Wilson Family Foundation, Robert clarified. We provide funding for arts education and accessibility programs. Martha's experience as an educator offers valuable perspective. I watched my son reassess the situation, his marketing executive mind visibly recalculating. The car, the driver, the foundation, the subtle yet unmistakable signs of wealth that Robert carried effortlessly. That's wonderful, Daniel managed. Mom has always been passionate about education. Indeed, Robert replied. Her insights on making literature accessible across generations are particularly relevant to our initiatives. He turned slightly toward me. Until tomorrow, then. James will collect you at 6. I look forward to it, I said, perhaps enjoying the performance a little too much. Robert's hand found mine, raising it briefly to his lips in an old-fashioned gesture that felt perfectly natural coming from him. The pleasure is entirely mine, Martha. As James helped Robert back into the car, Daniel remained frozen beside me, visibly processing the scene. The sleek vehicle pulled away with a quiet purr, leaving us alone on the sidewalk. Mom, Daniel began carefully, who exactly is Robert Wilson? A gentleman who understands that my age doesn't define my competence, I replied, retrieving my keys and heading toward the building entrance. Daniel followed, still trying to reconcile this new information with his preconceptions of me. When did I even meet a wealthy, cultured man who values my company and opinions, he stammered. I glanced back at him. About 20 minutes after you drove away and left me stranded. Inside my apartment, Daniel paced while I put on the kettle for tea, a far simpler ritual than the service at Robert's mansion, but comforting in its familiarity. I was worried sick, Daniel finally admitted. When you weren't home and your phone went straight to voicemail, I checked the hospital, Mom. That must have been frightening for you, I acknowledged, measuring tea leaves into my favorite pot. Almost as frightening as being abandoned without transportation or enough money, he winced. I was angry. I shouldn't have left you there. No, you shouldn't have, I agreed, my voice firm but not unkind. Just as you shouldn't make decisions about my living arrangements without consulting me first. Daniel sank onto my sofa, running a hand through his hair in a gesture so reminiscent of his father that my irritation softened slightly. I'm worried about you living alone, Mom. The stairs in this building, the distance from my family, your arthritis worsening. All legitimate concerns, I said, bringing our tea to the coffee table. But these are things we can discuss as equals, rather than you dictating what's best for me as if I were a child, like that senior facility today. Exactly like that, he admitted. Daniel studied me over his teacup. So. Robert Wilson. He seems impressive. I couldn't help smiling at the transparent attempt to extract information. He is, I said. And you're having dinner with him tomorrow? With him and his foundation board? Yes. My son hesitated. I'm sorry I left you at that bus stop. It was childish and cruel. Yes, it was, I agreed, then reached over to pat his hand. A simple gesture that carried the reminder that, despite everything, I was still capable. After Daniel left, full of apologies and a promise to discuss, not dictate, future plans, I sat alone in my apartment, replaying the events of the extraordinary day. One detail continued to nag at me, Robert's comment about Daniel's car. How had a blind man known its color, or that someone was pacing beside it? And there were other moments, the way he navigated his home with precise confidence, noticed my wedding band, executed gestures with perfect aim. Small inconsistencies, yet together they formed a pattern I couldn't quite decipher. Later, as I prepared for bed, my phone, now recharged, chimed with a text from an unknown number. I hope our small performance provided satisfactory results. Looking forward to tomorrow's dinner. Sleep well, RW. I stared at the screen, wondering exactly what sort of man I had met today, and why the thought of seeing him again filled me with such unexpected anticipation. The following morning, I was distracted, my mind repeatedly returning to Robert Wilson and the peculiar inconsistencies in his behavior. While watering my modest collection of houseplants, I analyzed our interactions with the same meticulous attention I had once given complex literary texts with my students. A blind man who noticed a blue car and a pacing figure from a moving vehicle, who poured tea with perfect precision, whose home lacked the tactile modifications one would expect, who texted me directly rather than through an assistant. The obvious conclusion seemed impossible, that Robert Wilson, wealthy philanthropist, was not truly blind. But if that were true, why maintain such an elaborate deception? What purpose could it serve? At noon, a delivery arrived, an elegant box containing a handwritten note in flowing script. For this evening's foundation dinner. I took the liberty of having Sophia select something appropriate. If it is not to your taste, please disregard. Robert. Inside was a stunning deep blue dress in my exact size, with a cashmere wrap and tasteful jewelry to match. The presumption should have offended me. Instead, I found myself smoothing the fabric, letting my fingers linger on the luxurious material. It had been years since anyone had given me clothing as a gift, longer still since I'd worn anything so elegant. My phone rang as I examined the accompanying sapphire earrings. Mom, Daniel's voice carried a tentative note I rarely heard from my usually confident son. I wanted to check in after yesterday. I'm fine, Daniel, I assured him, settling into my reading chair. In fact, I'm preparing for this evening's event. He cleared his throat. About that. I did some research on Robert Wilson. Of course, he had. Daniel never could resist investigating anything that didn't fit neatly into his orderly worldview. And he's not just wealthy, Mom. Forbes estimates his net worth at over $3 billion. His security technology company revolutionized digital privacy, and he's been almost completely reclusive since losing his sight 15 years ago. I absorbed the information slowly. 3 billion. The number floated abstractly, disconnected from the attentive man who had rescued me from a bus stop. Why are you telling me this? I asked finally. Daniel hesitated. Because it's unusual for someone who rarely appears in public to take an interest in my mother. I worry he might have ulterior motives. I couldn't suppress the amusement in my voice. Like seducing a 67-year-old retired teacher for her fortune in second-hand books. Mom, please. I'm serious. Men like Wilson operate differently. Everything is strategic. Perhaps his strategy is simply kindness to a stranger, I suggested. Not everything has an angle, Daniel. After ending the call with reassurances that I would be cautious, I returned to the blue dress and the enigmatic man who had sent it. My analytical mind couldn't let go of the inconsistencies, the puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit. I found myself doing my own research, typing Robert Wilson, blind technology magnate into my tablet. The results were illuminating. Articles described him as a reclusive genius who continued to run his company remotely after losing his sight to a degenerative condition. Photos showed a younger Robert at industry events, always impeccably dressed, often alongside world leaders and tech pioneers. More recent images were scarce, occasional blurry paparazzi shots showing him with dark glasses and a cane, always accompanied by James or his daughter. One financial blog speculated on his deliberate retreat from public life, noting the contrast between his personal reclusiveness and the company's high profile, along with his foundation's active public presence. Another article cited rumors that his condition was less severe than reported, quoting anonymous former employees who claimed he maintained more control over daily operations than publicly acknowledged. Nothing conclusive, but enough to feed my growing suspicion that Robert Wilson's blindness might be, at least in part, a carefully crafted facade. By late afternoon, I prepared for the evening with unusual care. I styled my silver hair into an elegant arrangement, applied makeup with meticulous attention I hadn't bothered with in years, and slipped into the blue dress, which fit as if it had been made for me. Looking in the mirror, I hardly recognized myself. The woman reflected back seemed confident, distinguished, even attractive in a way I had long stopped considering relevant. Precisely at 6, the doorbell rang. James stood in the hallway, formal and precise as ever. "Mrs. Collins," he greeted with a slight bow. "Mr. Wilson sends his apologies for not collecting you personally. He is attending to last-minute arrangements for the dinner." "Of course," I replied, gathering the cashmere wrap into a small evening bag. "The dress is lovely, by the way. Please thank Mr. Wilson for his thoughtfulness. He has an excellent eye for such things," James said, pausing almost imperceptibly as if catching himself. "That is to say, he has excellent taste and trusted advisors." I noted the slip with interest but said nothing as he escorted me to the waiting car. The foundation dinner was being held at the Wilson Museum of Contemporary Art, a modernist glass and stone structure on the waterfront. As we approached, people in formal attire ascended the wide steps, flashes from photographers occasionally illuminating the night as minor celebrities and local dignitaries arrived. "There will be press," James warned as we pulled up. "Mr. Wilson asked me to escort you directly inside to avoid unnecessary attention." The efficiency with which James guided me through a side entrance and into a private elevator suggested a well-established protocol. We emerged into a quiet hallway, where Robert stood waiting, resplendent in a tailored tuxedo, dark glasses replaced by a subtly tinted pair. "Martha," he greeted, turning at our approach with perfect timing, as if he had known exactly when I would arrive. "Did you doubt I would?" I asked, allowing him to take my hand. "People often find my world intimidating," he replied. "The dress suits you perfectly." "Yes," I said, studying his face carefully. "Sophia has an excellent eye." "She does," he agreed smoothly. "Though I selected the color myself. Dark blue has a depth that complements your voice." "My voice has a color?" I asked lightly, intrigued. His smile deepened, creating fine lines around his mouth that hadn't been apparent the day before. When one sense diminishes, the others compensate in remarkable ways. I decided to test a small theory. "The earrings are exquisite," I said, deliberately keeping my hands still and making no sound that might betray their location. Without hesitation, Robert's hand lifted, hovering near my right ear, exactly where the sapphire caught the light. "Simple elegance suits you far better than ostentation," he said. His fingers lingered just inches from my ear, warmth radiating from his touch. We remained suspended in that almost contact for several heartbeats before James discreetly cleared his throat. "Sir, the guests are assembling for the reception. Ms. Wilson asked me to remind you to greet the mayor before dinner." Robert's hand fell, and the moment dissolved. "Duty calls," he said with a faint sigh. "Shall we face the crowds together, Martha? I find these events far more tolerable with pleasant company." He offered his arm with the practiced precision of a blind man. Yet as I linked mine with his, a certainty nagged at me: those tinted glasses were observing me with perfect clarity. The question was no longer whether Robert Wilson could see. I was convinced he could. The question was why he pretended otherwise, and whether I should confront him about what I suspected. For now, I resolved to watch and gather evidence, approaching the enigma of Robert Wilson with the same methodical scrutiny I once applied to Shakespearean deceptions with my senior students. After all, as I often reminded them, the most compelling characters are always the ones who guard their secrets. The Wilson Foundation's annual gala proved a masterclass in refined philanthropy. The museum's grand hall had been transformed into a sophisticated dining space, tables arranged around a small stage and podium. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over arrangements of white orchids and blue hydrangeas that matched my dress so perfectly I briefly wondered whether it had been deliberate. With Robert's arm linked through mine, we navigated the crowd with an appearance of effortless precision. He moved confidently, occasionally touching my arm or leaning closer as if seeking guidance through especially dense clusters of guests. Yet I noticed how he never collided with anyone, how he seemed to anticipate movement before it happened, how his face turned toward approaching people seconds before they spoke. "Robert, marvelous event as always," called a silver-haired woman in an elaborate emerald gown. "And who is your lovely companion?" "Elaine Harrington, chairman of the City Symphony Board," Robert murmured to me before raising his voice. Ella, may I present Martha Collins, a retired literature professor whose insights on educational accessibility have been invaluable. I shook her hand, noting how Robert had elevated my modest high school teaching role into a professorship. A pleasure to meet you, Professor Collins, Elaine beamed. How refreshing to see a new face in Robert's circle. He's become such a recluse these past years. With good reason, Robert replied smoothly. Large gatherings are challenging without sight. Of course, Elaine backpedaled immediately. I didn't mean. No offense taken, he assured her. Now, if you'll excuse us, I believe the mayor is waving for my attention. He wasn't, of course. The mayor was engrossed in conversation with a group of businessmen near the bar, his back to us. The mayor is actually elsewhere, I observed quietly as we moved away. Robert's lips curved. Is he? How convenient. Elaine's charitable contributions are inversely proportional to her conversational tact. I laughed despite myself. A clever social escape, I thought, claiming to see those who demand attention. His steps faltered almost imperceptibly, and I realized too late I had laid a verbal trap. A figure of speech, he recovered smoothly. James usually signals me when someone is trying to catch my eye, but James is nowhere near us right now, and we both know it. Before I could probe further, Sophia appeared, elegant in a burgundy gown that complemented her dark hair. Dad, we're about to begin the presentation. Martha, I've seated you at our family table. She flicked a glance between us, suspicion crossing her features. I hope you're enjoying yourself. Immense pleasure, I replied. Your father has been introducing me to quite an impressive array of people. Sophia's voice carried a faint note of concern. Dad excels at networking despite his limitations. The subtle emphasis did not escape me. Sophia was marking her territory, a subtle reminder of her father's vulnerability, or at least the vulnerability he claimed. Dinner unfolded as a sumptuous five-course affair, punctuated by brief speeches highlighting the foundation's achievements. Robert delivered his remarks with effortless charisma, never once consulting notes he could not see, moving across the stage with measured steps that seemed cautious yet never uncertain. I watched with heightened awareness, noting how the audience responded with that mixture of admiration and sympathy reserved for those who triumph over adversity. When he returned to our table, I leaned in under the pretext of helping him locate his water glass. Impressive speech. One might almost forget you can't see your audience. He stiffened for a heartbeat, then relaxed, his fingers finding mine beneath the tablecloth. One prepares thoroughly when performing blind, he murmured, emphasizing the last word so subtly I almost imagined it. Throughout dinner, I catalogued more anomalies. Robert identified a piece of asparagus on his plate without touching it. He responded to Sophia's subtle hand signals across the table. Most tellingly, when a waiter accidentally dropped a tray of glasses at the far end of the room, Robert's head turned toward the crash a fraction of a second before it happened, as if he had foreseen the tray tipping. After dessert, the formal portion of the evening concluded, and guests began to mingle as a small orchestra played soft classical music. Robert guided me toward a quieter alcove near the museum's sculpture garden. You've been unusually quiet, he observed, two champagne flutes in hand, perhaps reconsidering his choice to bring me along. Not at all, I replied, accepting the glass. I'm simply observing. And what have your observations revealed, Professor Collins? There was a teasing challenge in his voice. I took a deliberate sip of champagne, weighing my words. The teacher in me wanted to present my evidence systematically. The woman who had been patronized and underestimated by her son wanted to demonstrate her sharp mind. Yet a different impulse guided me, fascination. Robert Wilson navigated his world with remarkable precision for a man supposedly unable to see. His posture shifted subtly, shoulders tensing and spine straightening, though his expression remained neutral. The human brain adapts impressively to sensory loss, spatial memory, auditory cues, I said. Yes. And noticing blue cars from moving vehicles, identifying earrings without touching them, turning toward accidents before they happen. I set my champagne glass down with deliberate care. I taught literature for 40 years, Mr. Wilson. I recognize a carefully constructed narrative when I see one. For several long moments, he said nothing, face angled slightly away as if weighing his options. When he finally turned back, his voice dropped to just above a whisper. "This is hardly the venue for such a conversation." "Then suggest a better one," I replied, surprised by my own boldness. A faint smile curved his lips. "You are not what I expected, Martha Collins." "I rarely am these days. Age has a way of freeing one from expectations." He nodded thoughtfully. "The sculpture garden. 10 minutes. Take the east door and follow the path to the fountain." Before I could respond, he straightened and raised his voice to a normal level. "Sophia, there you are. I was just telling Martha about your remarkable work with the Foundation's educational initiatives." Sophia had approached silently, I hadn't even noticed her. Yet Robert had slipped in his performance. She glanced between us, carefully neutral but sharp-eyed. "Nothing remarkable about it. Just continuing your vision," she said. "Martha, I hope Dad hasn't monopolized your entire evening. Several board members would value your perspective." The subtle dismissal was clear. Sophia wanted time alone with her father. Perhaps to question my presence, perhaps to caution him about what she suspected might be developing. "I was just about to visit the ladies' room," I said pleasantly. "If you'll excuse me." As I walked away, I felt their eyes, both pairs, following me across the room. 10 minutes, Robert had said. 10 minutes until I might uncover the truth behind the performance I'd been witnessing. I checked my reflection in the restroom mirror, adjusting a stray strand of silver hair. The woman staring back appeared poised, elegant, and unexpectedly resolute. Daniel wouldn't recognize this version of his mother, the woman willing to meet a near stranger in a dim garden to confront a suspected deception. Yet, as I slipped through the east door into the cool evening air, I felt more alive than I had in years. The sculpture garden was a study in shadows and soft illumination. Strategic lighting highlighted modernist installations while leaving pathways in gentle darkness. The night air carried the scent of jasmine and the distant murmur of the gala inside. I followed the stone path as instructed, my heels clicking softly against the pavers until I reached a circular fountain where water cascaded over black marble in a hypnotic pattern. Robert was already there, his back to me, silhouetted against the illuminated water. He had removed his tinted glasses, letting them dangle from one hand. Without turning, he spoke. "You counted 7 discrepancies in my performance tonight. I noticed you cataloging them." I approached slowly, coming to stand beside him. 8, actually." He turned then, and for the first time I saw his eyes directly. Clear, alert, and unmistakably fixed on mine. No haze. No drifting focus. Nothing at all to suggest blindness. 8, he conceded with a faint nod. "What gave me away?" "The blue car yesterday was the first clue," I replied, holding his gaze. "But tonight, it was the earrings that confirmed it. You reached for them without any sound to guide you." "A careless lapse," he admitted. "Normally, I'm more disciplined." "Why?" I asked quietly. "Why pretend to be blind?" Robert exhaled, gesturing toward a nearby stone bench. "Shall we sit?" "It's not a short story." The bench was cool beneath me as we settled side by side, close enough that our shoulders nearly touched. He slipped the tinted glasses into his pocket, evidently done with them, for me, at least. 15 years ago, he began, I wasn't just wealthy. I was visible. Magazine covers, televised interviews, private meetings with presidents and prime ministers. My company's security innovations made me a public figure in an industry where anonymity is the ultimate luxury. He paused, his profile sharp against the faint light. Then came the threats. Not the usual corporate extortion or random harassment, but targeted ones. Against my family. Sophia was still in college. Someone sent her photographs, taken inside her dorm room, along with technical schematics of our home security systems. A message that they could breach them whenever they pleased. A chill ran through me, one that had nothing to do with the night air. How terrifying, I murmured. We reinforced every layer of security, he continued, but the psychological damage was done. Privacy, true privacy, was gone. His hands flexed in his lap, betraying the memory's weight. Then I developed macular degeneration. Mild, treatable. Hardly disabling with modern medicine. But it gave me an idea. To vanish while remaining visible, I said softly, understanding dawning. Exactly. He turned to me, his gaze unwavering. The world treats the blind differently. People avert their eyes. They speak past you. They underestimate you. I saw a way to build a shield, an identity that would let me exist unseen, even in plain sight. A wealthy, blind recluse who occasionally inspired human interest pieces, but was otherwise left alone. But the deception became so elaborate, I said. Your home, your habits, the foundation. What began as a temporary refuge from scrutiny, he said quietly, turned into a prison of my own design. His voice carried a tired honesty that softened the edges of his words. Now, only James and Sophia know the truth. And you, Martha Collins, who unraveled me in less than 2 days. I let the confession settle between us, absorbing its strangeness and the weight it carried. The foundation's work, it's genuine, isn't it? I asked. Completely, he said. At first, the blindness foundation was part of the cover. But somewhere along the way, it became real. I discovered a true passion for accessibility issues. The irony isn't lost on me, a sighted man advocating for the blind while pretending to be one of them. A morally tangled position, I observed gently. One that keeps me awake more often than I'd like, he said with a rueful smile. I've donated millions to research and technology for the visually impaired. Perhaps it's my form of penance. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The fountain's rhythmic murmur filled the silence. When I finally found my voice, I surprised myself with the question. Why tell me the truth? You could have kept the illusion. I'm hardly a threat to your world. Robert turned fully toward me then, and for the first time, the mask truly slipped. His expression was open, unguarded, vulnerable in a way his supposed blindness had never allowed. Because when I met you at that bus stop, he said softly, I saw something I hadn't seen in 15 years, authenticity. You weren't performing for anyone. Even humiliated and abandoned, you carried yourself with quiet dignity. It wasn't about appearance. It was real. His honesty disarmed me. For a man who had lived behind a facade for so long, the confession seemed almost painful. And when you started noticing the cracks, he continued, I felt both exposed and exhilarated. Most people see only what they expect to see. You observed. That was refreshing. Terrifying, but refreshing. Terrifying? I echoed, unable to hide my disbelief. A billionaire frightened by a retired teacher? Not frightened of you, he corrected gently. Frightened of being seen. Truly seen, without the armor of wealth or disability to distort the reflection. His hand moved tentatively toward mine, resting between us on the cool stone. Do you understand what I'm saying, Martha? I did, perhaps more clearly than he expected. Robert Wilson, for all his wealth and influence, had been hiding not from danger but from intimacy. The blindness that once served as a shield had become a wall between him and genuine human connection. What will you do now? I asked, allowing his fingers to brush lightly against mine. Continue the illusion with everyone else? For now, he admitted. The alternative would be complicated. But with you, he paused, searching for the right words. With you, I'd like to be simply Robert. No performance. No pretense. There was a vulnerability in his voice that stirred something deep within me, a quiet recognition of how rare unguarded honesty becomes with age. So much of life, I realized, turns into performance and compromise. I think I'd like that, I said softly. Though it does make me wonder what other secrets you might be hiding, Mr. Wilson. He laughed, an unrestrained, genuine sound that startled me with its warmth. A fair question. But I assure you, the false blindness was my greatest deception. Everything else, the wealth, the foundation, the man himself, is entirely real. A discreet cough broke the moment. James stood at the garden's entrance, his expression politely blank, though I was certain he'd seen more than he would ever admit. Robert's unguarded face, our hands barely parted. "Sir," he said, "Ms. Wilson is looking for you. The mayor is preparing to leave and wishes to say his goodbyes." Robert sighed and withdrew his hand from mine, reluctant but composed. "Back to the performance," he murmured, retrieving his glasses. As he slipped them on, I watched the transformation take place. His posture shifted subtly, the confidence in his gaze dimmed into practiced blindness. Within seconds, the man beside me was once again the persona the world expected. Before we stepped back into the light and noise of the gala, he turned to me. "Having someone who knows the truth, who knows me, after all these years," he paused, struggling for words. "It feels like coming up for air after being underwater for far too long." As we re-entered the brilliance of chandeliers and polite conversation, I couldn't help wondering what I had stepped into, a friendship, perhaps something deeper, with a man whose entire public existence was founded on deception. And yet, his honesty in the garden had felt more authentic than anything I'd experienced in years. Sophia found us almost immediately, her eyes narrowing slightly as she registered our joint return from the shadows. "There you are, Dad. The mayor's waiting to say goodbye." Her gaze shifted to me, cool but courteous. "Martha, I hope you've enjoyed our little event." "It's been enlightening," I replied evenly, meeting her eyes. One of her perfectly sculpted brows arched at my choice of words, but before she could respond, Robert gently pressed my hand. "Most enlightening indeed," he added. The shared amusement between us hung in the air like a private echo. The following week unfolded like a dream, my familiar routines punctuated by moments so surreal they left me questioning the boundaries of my once predictable life. Robert called every day. Our conversations meandered from literature to philosophy to the quiet details of our daily lives. In private, he spoke freely now, the charade of blindness abandoned, the mask discarded. On Wednesday, he invited me to dinner at his home. "A proper meal this time," he said with a teasing smile. "Not just tea for a stranded bus passenger." I accepted without hesitation, ignoring the cautious voice that had dictated most of my adult decisions. At 67, I decided I had earned the right to take a few imprudent chances. Daniel called that afternoon, his timing so suspiciously perfect that I wondered if he possessed a sixth sense for his mother's unconventional choices. "I looked into the Wilson Foundation," he began without preamble. "Their educational programs are actually impressive. They've funded literacy initiatives in 20 states. "How thorough of you," I replied, selecting a pair of earrings for the evening. "Any reason for this sudden research project?" "Just making sure everything checks out." He hesitated. "You've been spending time with this man?" I sighed and set the earrings down. "Daniel, your concern is noted, but unnecessary. Robert Wilson is exactly what he appears to be, a generous philanthropist with a sincere interest in education." The irony of that statement, technically true, though hardly the whole truth, was not lost on me. I had, in my own quiet way, become complicit in his deception. "So you're seeing him socially?" Daniel pressed. "We're friends," I replied. The word definition felt both inadequate and presumptuous. What were we, exactly? Two people who had shared an unexpected moment of truth, bound by a secret, and perhaps by something even less tangible. When I arrived at Robert's estate that evening, I sensed a subtle change from my first visit. James greeted me with his usual formality but led me not to the grand dining hall I'd glimpsed before, but to a smaller, warmer room. The table was set for two, candlelight flickering across polished silverware, while a fire crackled softly in the stone hearth. Robert was waiting, without his dark glasses, dressed casually in a crisp shirt and tailored slacks instead of his customary suit. The sight of him, unmasked, at ease, clearly pleased to see me, stirred an unexpected flutter somewhere beneath my ribs. "No performance tonight," he said, gesturing lightly to his eyes. "Just us," I replied, accepting the glass of wine he offered. "No audience to convince. Except perhaps Sophia," he added with a wry smile. "She'll almost certainly question the kitchen staff tomorrow about what we had for dinner." I raised an eyebrow. "She doesn't approve of me." "She's protective," Robert said, guiding me to my seat. "And suspicious by nature. It's a quality that's served her well as CEO. She hasn't quite decided whether you're a potential threat or a welcome influence." "And which is it?" I asked, the question slipping out bolder than intended. He studied me over the rim of his glass, his gaze so steady that I momentarily forgot how convincing his performance of blindness had once been. "Both, perhaps. You've disturbed a carefully balanced order, but not in an unwelcome way." Dinner was exquisite, dishes I recognized from my teaching years in Italy, recreated with meticulous authenticity. Our conversation flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences that felt as natural as speech. "I've been thinking about your situation," I said, as we lingered over dessert. "The ethics of your performance." "Ah." He set down his fork, smiling faintly. I wondered when the professor would deliver her moral evaluation. "Not an evaluation," I corrected. "A question. Has it been worth it? 15 years of pretending, of isolation, of constantly guarding yourself against exposure. What has it given you that outweighs what it's taken away?" He didn't answer right away. His fingers traced the stem of his glass, deliberate and contemplative. "At first, it gave me safety. Some peace, even. The freedom to observe without being observed, a kind of one-way mirror between myself and the world." He looked up, meeting my eyes. "But lately, I've begun to wonder whether the protection is worth the solitude." "Because of me?" I asked quietly, suddenly self-conscious. "Because of what meeting you revealed," he said. "How automatic the performance has become. How deeply the barriers have set in. You saw through them so easily, it made me realize how much of myself I've lost behind them." His words carried a rawness that caught me off guard. I felt an ache of empathy, something unspoken rising between us. But before I could respond, the door to the dining room swung open. Sophia stood in the doorway, frozen mid-step. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene, her father without his glasses, his gaze unmistakably directed at me in the candlelight. "Dad." Her voice trembled slightly, edged with disbelief and alarm. Robert didn't startle or fumble for his glasses. Instead, he exhaled quietly and gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Join us, Sophia. It seems we have something to discuss." Her gaze flicked between us, comprehension dawning in fragments. "She knows," she said finally, half a statement, half an accusation. "She figured it out," Robert confirmed evenly. "Quite quickly, actually." Sophia turned to me, her composure cracking enough to reveal the fear beneath. "Who have you told?" "No one," I assured her, understanding the panic in her voice. "And I have no intention of telling anyone." She remained standing, shoulders rigid, eyes sharp with apprehension. "Do you have any idea what's at stake here?" "The foundation, the company, our privacy, our safety, everything depends on maintaining this illusion." "I understand the stakes," I said calmly, drawing on decades of diffusing tense classroom situations. "Your father's secret is safe with me." "On what basis?" Sophia challenged, her tone sharp. "A week's acquaintance? Some misguided romantic notion?" The dismissive way she framed our connection stung more than I cared to admit. Before I could respond, Robert intervened. "Sophia, that's enough. Martha has demonstrated more insight and discretion in 1 week than most people show in a lifetime. I trust her." "You trusted her enough to risk everything we've built," Sophia countered, finally sinking into the chair beside him, "without consulting me." "I didn't plan this," Robert said with remarkable patience. "Martha noticed discrepancies no one else has seen in 15 years. Rather than expose me publicly, or use the information for personal gain, she addressed me privately. Sophia's gaze sharpened, reassessing. "What do you want from us, Mrs. Collins?" The blunt question caught me off guard. "Want from this situation? From your father? Surely there's a reason you're asking." Robert's voice, usually measured, carried a rare edge. "It's a fair question." I turned to her directly. "What I want is exactly what I've already received. Honest conversation. Genuine connection. The respect to be seen as I am, not as a stereotype of the aging widow. Your father offered me dignity when my own son treated me as incapable. I've given him the simple courtesy of authenticity, without performance." Sophia's expression softened slightly, though a trace of wariness lingered. "And the unspoken truth hung between us. If anything developed between Robert and me, it would heighten the risk of exposure in their carefully constructed world." Before I could respond, Robert reached across the table and deliberately took my hand. "Then we'll face that challenge together," he said, eyes moving from his daughter to me. "Because, for the first time in 15 years, I'm experiencing something worth the risk." The simple statement shifted the room's energy. Sophia's rigid posture eased slightly, and a warm certainty spread through me, unrelated to the wine or the fire's heat. Whatever complexities lay ahead, we would navigate them together, two people who had recognized in each other something rare and worth protecting. "I should go," I said finally, aware that father and daughter needed privacy to process the revelation. "It's late." As James drove me home that evening, I reflected on how drastically life had changed since the bus stop. 1 week ago, I was a retired teacher fighting for autonomy against a controlling son. Now I was entangled in a billionaire's elaborate deception, contemplating a relationship that would demand navigating unfamiliar, precarious territory. Yet, despite, or perhaps because of, the complications, I felt more alive than I had in years. Saturday morning brought unexpected sunshine after days of spring rain. I sipped coffee on my balcony when the intercom buzzed, announcing a visitor. Daniel stood in the hallway, a bakery box in hand, wearing a determinedly cheerful expression. "Peace offering," he said, lifting the box. "Almond croissants, you like them?" I recognized the gesture as an attempt to reset our relationship after the bus stop incident, though the timing felt suspiciously aligned with my growing connection to Robert. Over coffee and pastries, Daniel steered the conversation through neutral territory, our children, an upcoming work conference, neighborhood news, until, finally, he broached the subject weighing on his mind. "So this friendship with Robert Wilson," he began, casual but precise. "It seems to be continuing." "It is," I confirmed, brushing crumbs from my fingers. "We enjoy each other's company." Daniel nodded, his analytical mind clearly at work. "He's an interesting choice of friend. His reputation for reclusiveness is well documented." "Perhaps that's changing," I replied noncommittally. "Mom," Daniel said, setting down his cup with deliberate care. "I want you to be careful. Men like Wilson operate in entirely different spheres, with different rules. The power imbalance alone." "Power imbalance?" I interrupted, unable to suppress a laugh. "I'm not some naive young woman dazzled by wealth, Daniel. I'm a 67-year-old retired teacher. I've raised a child, buried a husband, and managed my own life just fine." He looked momentarily abashed, and I allowed myself a small, triumphant smile. "It's just that people with his level of wealth and influence often lead complicated lives," Daniel said carefully, "with motives that aren't always obvious." If only he knew how accurate that observation was, though not in the way he imagined. Robert's complexities extended far beyond the typical eccentricities of the ultra-wealthy. "I appreciate your concern," I replied, softening my tone, "but I trust my judgment about Robert. Complicated life and all." Daniel looked as though he might press the issue further when his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen, eyebrows lifting in surprise. "It's the office. On a Saturday." He rose, muttering, "I should take this," and stepped out onto the balcony. As I cleared the dishes, I caught glimpses of him through the glass door, his expression shifting from mild irritation to sharp interest. When he returned, his entire demeanor had changed. "That was incredible," he said, sliding his phone into his pocket. "The Wilson Foundation just called my agency. They're looking for a marketing partner for their national literacy initiative, and apparently, my name was recommended." I kept my expression neutral, though the pieces clicked together instantly. "What a fortunate coincidence," I said mildly. "Coincidence?" Daniel repeated slowly, studying my face. "Mom, did you have something to do with this?" "I may have mentioned to Robert that you work in marketing," I admitted. "Nothing more than that." Daniel sank onto the sofa, processing. "This would be huge, Mom. Their annual marketing budget runs into the millions." "Then you'd better prepare a compelling presentation," I suggested. He looked up sharply. "Is that why you've been spending time with Wilson? To advance my career?" The accusation stung, an echo of his assumption that everything I did must somehow revolve around him. "Absolutely not," I said evenly. "My friendship with Robert stands on its own. If he's decided to consider your firm, that's his independent decision." Daniel exhaled, contrite. "I'm sorry. That was unfair. It's just strange, reconciling the reclusive billionaire from the news with the man who's suddenly having dinner with my mother." "People are often more complicated than their public image," I replied, an understatement that nearly made me smile despite myself. After Daniel left, energized by his unexpected business opportunity, I received a text from Robert. Was that too transparent an olive branch? "Sophia recommended subtlety, but I've found that subtlety becomes overrated past a certain age. RW." I smiled as I read it. "Transparent but effective," I replied. He's simultaneously suspicious and pleased. "Much like Sophia, I suspect." His response came quickly. "Sunday brunch at the Botanical Gardens. A new spring exhibition. Appropriately public, but still our private understanding." The delicately balanced phrasing, acknowledging both his public blindness and our private truth, touched me more than I expected. "I'd like that very much," I wrote back. Sunday's outing revealed just how intricate Robert's public performance truly was. James drove us to the Botanical Gardens, where Robert emerged from the car wearing his dark glasses and carrying his white cane. His movements were perfectly calibrated, deliberate but dignified, suggesting dependence without inviting pity. I found myself instinctively adapting to his rhythm, offering my arm when needed, describing the scenery in ways that supported his facade without overcompensating. "You're a natural accomplice," he murmured as we walked beneath a canopy of blooming cherry trees. "Most people overdo it, too loud, too descriptive, too eager to help." "Years of teaching reluctant students to appreciate Shakespeare," I replied. "One learns how to guide gently while preserving pride." We drew occasional glances, the elegantly dressed blind man and his silver-haired companion, but no one looked twice. Robert maintained the careful distance expected of him in public, our closeness expressed through conversation rather than touch. It was only when we wandered into the quiet warmth of the tropical conservatory, momentarily alone, that he removed his glasses. His eyes, clear and unguarded, met mine directly. "This performance becomes exhausting in your presence," he said softly. "I find myself wanting to simply look at you, to see your expressions without the filter of pretense." The intensity of his gaze made me unexpectedly aware of myself, the fine lines at my eyes, the silver in my hair, the quiet markers of time I had long accepted without thought. "What do you see when you look at me?" The question escaped before I could stop it. His smile deepened, softening the edges of his face. "Clarity. Intelligence. A woman entirely at ease in her own skin." He replaced his glasses as approaching voices echoed down the path. "A rare and beautiful combination," he added, "at any age." Later, over lunch at the Gardens Cafe, our conversation shifted toward more practical matters. "Sophia is arranging a discreet background check," Robert said, his tone carrying quiet apology. "It's standard procedure for anyone who becomes aware of my situation." I set my fork down, unruffled by the revelation. I rather assumed as much. She's protective of you. She's thorough, he corrected gently. And wary of potential exploitation. The inquiry is as much for your protection as for mine. A way to confirm you understand the legal implications of what you now know. I considered that carefully. There would be lawsuits if your deception became public, wouldn't there? Almost certainly, he admitted. Business partners, shareholders, even the foundation could claim fraud or misrepresentation. He sighed. The irony doesn't escape me. The very fiction I created for safety now leaves me most exposed. And yet you chose to trust me with the truth, I observed. He smiled faintly. A calculated risk. Though lately, the calculation feels far less important than the connection. As James drove us back to my building, I found myself reflecting on the strange duality of our evolving bond. In public, we performed one version of reality, the kindly blind philanthropist and his attentive companion. In private, we inhabited another, two people discovering unexpected connection late in life, bound together by an elaborate secret. Daniel's agency presents to your foundation tomorrow, I mentioned as the car approached my street. Yes. Sophia will oversee the proposals, Robert replied. I've recused myself from the decision to avoid any perception of bias. Thank you, I said sincerely. It's better that the outcome rests on merit, not influence. He nodded. Integrity matters to you. Says the man pretending to be blind, I countered lightly. His laughter, rare and genuine, filled the car, and I found myself smiling despite the irony. Touché, Martha Collins. You have a remarkable gift for cutting through artifice, even mine. When the car pulled to the curb, James stepped out to open my door. Before I could move, Robert caught my hand briefly. Having someone who knows both versions of me, the public mask and the private man, means more than I can express, he said softly. Thank you for carrying that dual truth so gracefully. His sincerity lingered with me long after the car disappeared down the street, a quiet warmth amid the tangle of our unusual circumstances. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both extraordinary and strangely natural. Robert and I established our own quiet pattern, private dinners at his home where he could be entirely himself, and public outings where we maintained the delicate choreography of his supposed blindness. Each space held its own kind of intimacy, the unguarded honesty of the private, and the shared complicity of the public. Meanwhile, Daniel's agency had secured the Wilson Foundation account, a development that seemed to both delight and puzzle him. It was the strangest meeting, he said one evening over family dinner. Sophia Wilson grilled us like we were under oath, then announced we'd been selected before we even finished presenting. Your proposal must have been impressive, I suggested lightly, carefully avoiding Angela's knowing glance from across the table. My daughter-in-law had her own unspoken theories about my connection to Robert, though she was tactful enough not to voice them. That's just it, Daniel continued, frowning. We didn't even get through half our slides. It felt as though the decision had already been made before we walked in. I maintained a neutral expression, though privately I suspected Robert had influenced the outcome despite his claimed recusal. The contract served as a convenient bridge between our worlds, a professional link that lent credibility to a relationship Daniel could otherwise not quite categorize. Our dessert was interrupted by the vibration of my phone. A message from Robert appeared on the screen. Unexpected development. Need to speak with you urgently. Car on the way. RW. I excused myself, citing fatigue, though Daniel's skeptical look suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Outside, James waited by the curb, his demeanor more reserved than usual. What's happened? I asked once we were on the road. Mr. Wilson will explain, he replied quietly, offering nothing more. When we arrived, Robert was waiting, not in the formal drawing room, but in his study, the room I'd come to recognize as his true domain. The tension in his stance was unmistakable. Victor Reeves, he said without preamble as I entered. The investigative journalist I mentioned, he's publishing a feature next week, The Curious Case of Robert Wilson's Selective Blindness. My stomach tightened. He has evidence? Circumstantial, but persuasive, Robert said grimly, gesturing toward a folder on his desk. Sophia received an advance copy from a contact at the magazine. Reeves has been investigating for months, interviewing former staff, dissecting my public appearances, even consulting medical experts about the consistency of my symptoms. I skimmed the article. It methodically laid out a case questioning Robert's condition, careful to avoid direct accusations but planting doubt in the reader's mind. The journalist documented subtle inconsistencies in Robert's behavior at public events, noted the conspicuous absence of medical specialists visiting the mansion, and quoted anonymous sources describing instances in which he seemed to respond to visual cues. This stops just short of calling me a fraud, Robert observed quietly, but it leaves an impression. Legally cautious, yet practically damaging. What will you do? I asked, aware of the weight behind the question. He ran a hand through his silver hair and sighed. Sophia and our legal team are exploring options, a preemptive statement, potential defamation proceedings, or ignoring it and dismissing inquiries as baseless speculation. I studied the article again. None of the evidence was definitive, circumstantial, open to interpretation. True, he admitted, but it raises questions that could invite closer scrutiny. Eventually, that could uncover something concrete. I placed the paper down, sensing the unspoken anxiety. Including my sudden appearance in your life, he added, nodding grimly. Reeves mentions an unidentified female companion at recent events. He's noticed you, Martha, though he hasn't identified you yet. The weight of it settled heavily. My presence had created a vulnerability in Robert's carefully constructed facade. I must have looked concerned, because he moved quickly to sit beside me, taking my hands in his. This isn't your fault, he said firmly. Reeves has been investigating for months, long before we met. If anything, I've grown complacent in my performance, too comfortable in the role I created. Still, I replied, my presence complicates things. Perhaps we should be more discreet until this passes. Robert's expression tightened. Is that what you want? To step back from this, from us? The question carried weight beyond the immediate crisis. We had let our connection evolve without labels, without forced definitions. Now, external pressure demanded clarity. No, I said honestly. That's not what I want at all. Relief softened his features. Good. Because I've grown very attached to having you in my life, Martha Collins. The admission, simple as it was, shifted something between us. Robert raised a hand to my cheek, a touch so intimate that my breath caught. When he leaned forward to kiss me, it felt like the most natural progression imaginable, the culmination of weeks of shared secrets, honest conversation, and growing trust. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, then deepened with the quiet confidence of years. When we finally parted, I smiled despite the crisis that had brought us here. Well, I said softly, that certainly complicates the journalist's investigation. Robert laughed, tension easing from his face. Martha Collins, your uncanny ability to find humor in the most difficult situations is one of the many reasons I'm falling in love with you. The declaration hung between us, steady and considered. At our age, such admissions carried weight not in dramatic passion, but in deliberate certainty. I'm rather fond of you as well, Robert Wilson, I replied, the understatement deliberate and fully understood. He smiled at the words, though reality quickly reasserted itself. We need to decide how to handle this situation. If Reeves publishes the article, we face it together. I finished for him, steady and resolved, whatever consequences come, we face them together. Later, as James drove me home, I reflected on how dramatically my life had shifted since that bus stop encounter. In just over a month, I had gone from a widow navigating autonomy from a well-meaning but controlling son to a woman entangled in a billionaire's elaborate deception, and now facing potential public scrutiny. Yet, despite the complications, or perhaps because of them, I felt more alive than I had in years. The quiet, orderly life I had once planned around book clubs and arthritis management had expanded into dual realities, public performances, private truths, and the exhilarating contemplation of risk. Daniel was waiting outside my building when we arrived, his expression a mixture of concern and indignation. "You left dinner to meet him, didn't you?" he demanded as I stepped from the car. "Mom, what's really going on between you and Wilson?" I sighed, too drained from the evening's events to construct a convenient lie. "It's complicated, Daniel. And yes, we're more than casual acquaintances." "Are you?" He struggled for the words, hesitation evident. "Romantically involved," I said, choosing honesty over evasion. The directness of his question, asked on a public sidewalk, was startling, but liberating. The old Martha Collins might have softened the truth, shielded him from discomfort. This Martha chose candor. "Yes," I said simply. "We are." Daniel's expression flickered through shock, confusion, and finally, a strange resignation. "I don't understand this at all," he admitted. "But I suppose, that doesn't matter, does it?" "Your understanding matters to me," I said gently, "but your approval isn't required. I've spent years prioritizing your comfort and your preferences, Daniel. Now I'm choosing my own happiness." As he drove away and I stepped into my quiet apartment, an unexpected sense of calm settled over me. Despite the threatening article, the delicate entanglement with Robert, and my son's evident discomfort, I felt a rare serenity. At 67, I realized that life's most meaningful chapters might still lie ahead, waiting for the courage to turn the page. Sunday morning broke with deceptive calm. Victor Reeves's article had been published. I woke early, brewed coffee, and opened the magazine's digital edition on my tablet with a sense of dread. The feature dominated the homepage, the curious case of Robert Wilson's selective blindness, philanthropy, privacy, or fraud? The piece was harsher than the draft we had seen. Reeves had included recent photos from the botanical garden, one showing me guiding Robert past a sculpture installation. Though my face was obscured, the caption speculated about the mystery woman increasingly seen in Wilson's company, raising the possibility that she might be complicit in preserving his facade. My phone rang before I could finish reading. It was Sophia, her voice clipped, controlled. "Have you seen it?" "I'm reading it now," I said. "It's worse than the draft. Phones are already ringing, business partners, foundation affiliates, journalists looking for comment." A pause. Her professional composure faltered slightly. "This could destroy everything we've built, Martha." The rare use of my first name rather than the formal Mrs. Collins underscored the seriousness. Before I could respond, she continued, "Father wants you at the house. Emergency strategy meeting in 30 minutes. Can you come?" "Of course," I said, already heading toward my bedroom. "I'll be there as quickly as possible." James arrived almost instantly, his usual impassive demeanor replaced by grim efficiency as he navigated morning traffic. At the mansion, the security presence had intensified, extra guards at the gate, patrols along the grounds. Reporters and camera crews had already gathered at the perimeter. Inside, the atmosphere resembled a command center. Robert sat at the head of his study's conference table, flanked by legal advisors, PR specialists, and Sophia, who paced while speaking rapidly into her phone. When he saw me, Robert rose immediately, crossing the room with an unexpected public display of affection. He took both my hands in his. "I'm sorry to drag you into this," he murmured. "I was already in it," I reminded him quietly, the memory of uncovering his secret still vivid. Sophia ended her call abruptly and addressed the team. "The Foundation Board has called an emergency meeting. Major corporate partners are requesting statements. The medical privacy angle is buying us some time, but eventually, we'll need a definitive response." Robert's lead attorney, a distinguished man I recognized, cleared his throat. "Mr. Wilson, we've discussed this. Legally, maintaining the fiction is increasingly unsustainable. Acknowledging even partial recovery would be more defensible." Robert's voice was sardonic. "A sudden partial recovery after 15 years, just as I'm accused of faking blindness? Sounds convenient, doesn't it?" "It's more credible than continued denial in the face of mounting evidence," the attorney insisted. I watched the debate silently, understanding the stakes. Robert had spent 15 years carefully crafting this persona, the dignified blind philanthropist, a figure admired for overcoming adversity. Admitting deception now would not only jeopardize his personal credibility, but potentially destabilize the foundation, his company, and the precious privacy he had so meticulously protected. After an hour of increasingly circular discussion, Robert finally raised his hand, silencing the room. "I need to speak with Martha alone," he said firmly. "Everyone else, take 30 minutes. The others filed out quickly, though Sophia lingered at the doorway, hesitation written across her face, before finally following the team. Once we were alone, Robert removed his dark glasses, a gesture that now carried a weight of intimacy between us, and rubbed his eyes with a weariness that spoke louder than words. 15 years of careful construction, he murmured, undone in a single article. No self-pity, only weary acknowledgement. "What would you do, Martha?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. "You're asking my advice?" I said. "I'm asking what you would do in my place," he clarified. "You are the most ethically grounded person I know, and you understand this situation both from the inside and the outside." I considered my response carefully. "I think I would tell the truth, not because you've been caught, but because living behind a facade has taken more from you than it's ever given." He nodded slowly, letting my words settle. "The isolation was protective at first, but it became a prison." "I see that now." His gaze met mine, steady and unflinching. "Meeting you made it abundantly clear how much of life I've been missing by hiding. Then perhaps this article, troubling as it is, offers an opportunity," I suggested, "not for a convenient partial recovery, but for honesty on your own terms." Robert's expression shifted, thoughtful. "A public admission, an explanation of why a man who values privacy might take extraordinary measures to protect it," I added. "Not an apology for the deception itself, but a candid account of its purpose and its effects." He was silent for a long moment, considering this approach. Finally, he asked, "Would you stand with me publicly?" "It would mean scrutiny, publicity, everything I've avoided, and now I'd be imposing it on you as well." The question was weightier than the immediate crisis. It was an invitation to enter his world fully, to move from private connection into public partnership. At 67, I was being asked to step into a spotlight I had never sought, or imagined. "Yes," I said simply. "I would." When the team reconvened, Robert delivered his decision with the calm authority that had built his empire. Not a carefully measured partial truth, as his advisors recommended, but a complete narrative, his discomfort with fame and scrutiny, the strategic use of perceived disability as a shield, and the years spent living behind a carefully maintained facade. "We'll frame it as a personal statement," the public relations director suggested, already adapting to the unexpected approach. "Emphasize your contributions to accessibility and vision research as genuine commitments, and outline the foundation's future," Sophia added, her initial shock giving way to strategic planning. "Acknowledge the ethical complexity while affirming the mission." By evening, the statement was finalized, and a press conference scheduled for the following morning. As the team dispersed, Robert and I lingered in the garden, the same place where he had first revealed his secret. "Are you certain about this?" he asked quietly. "Once we step into that press conference together, your life changes irreversibly. The privacy you value, the quiet you've built, it will be compromised." I considered his words seriously. Indeed, my comfortable anonymity would be gone. I would become a character in the public story of Robert Wilson's deception and redemption, subject to speculation and judgment. "At our age," I said finally, "how many opportunities remain for genuine reinvention, for adventures we never imagined?" I took his hand, a familiar grounding gesture. "Besides, I've spent decades being defined as someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's teacher. Perhaps being remembered as the woman who saw through a billionaire's deception isn't such a bad final chapter." His laugh was warm with relief. "Not a final chapter, Martha. A new beginning." The next morning's press conference unfolded with the measured precision of a well-directed production. Robert entered without dark glasses or cane, his sight clearly intact as he surveyed the assembled journalists. I stood slightly behind him, alongside Sophia, a visible declaration of our solidarity. For 15 years, he began, voice steady, I maintained a fiction regarding my visual impairment. Today, I am here to acknowledge that deception and explain, not excuse, my reasons for it. The ensuing media frenzy was exactly as anticipated, outrage, fascination, and analysis in equal measure. Ethicists debated morality, business publications projected corporate consequences, and tabloids focused on me, the mystery woman who had inspired Robert Wilson's confession. Throughout it all, we maintained the united front established at the press conference, our shared truth acting as both shield and anchor. The Foundation's work continued, its mission strengthened through new initiatives emphasizing transparency and ethical governance. Sophia, after her initial skepticism, proved remarkably adaptable, turning the crisis into an opportunity to showcase her leadership during the transition. Daniel, as expected, was mortified by my sudden public visibility. "Mom, you're in the tabloids," he exclaimed during a tense Sunday dinner. "People at work are asking if you're really dating a billionaire who pretended to be blind." "And what do you tell them?" I asked with genuine curiosity. He exhaled, a mixture of resignation softening his initial dismay. "That my mother has always been extraordinarily perceptive, and that she seems genuinely happy." 6 months after Victor Reeves's explosive article, the scandal had largely faded, overtaken by newer, more sensational stories about other public figures. Robert and I had settled into a rhythm, dividing our time between his mansion and my apartment, which remained my private refuge, a sanctuary that preserved my independence even as our lives grew increasingly intertwined. On the anniversary of our first encounter at the bus stop, Robert suggested returning to that place. James drove us there, parking discreetly across the street. 1 year ago, Robert reflected quietly, you were abandoned here with no resources, and I was trapped in a deception of my own making. And now, I prompted, savoring the symmetry of returning to where our story began. We're both free in ways neither of us anticipated. He reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. Which brings me to a question I never imagined asking at this stage of life. Inside rested a sapphire ring, elegant in its simplicity. "Martha Collins," he said formally, "would you consider marriage to a reformed fraud, who has never seen more clearly than when he met you?" I laughed at his characteristic, self-deprecating honesty. "I would," I replied, allowing him to slip the ring onto my finger. "Though I insist my son walk me down the aisle, no matter how much he struggles to understand us." As we sat together at the bus stop where everything had changed, I reflected on the extraordinary journey we had shared, from the abandoned mother, to the seemingly blind gentleman, to whispered suggestions that led to revelations neither of us could have anticipated. "Your son will regret leaving you," Robert had said that day. He had been right, though not in the way either of us expected. Daniel's thoughtless abandonment had opened a door to transformation, not just for me, but for Robert, and eventually for Daniel himself, who was slowly learning to see his mother as a woman with a story still unfolding. Sometimes, the most profound journeys begin in the most ordinary places, like a suburban bus stop, where a discarded woman and a man hiding in plain sight discovered that being truly seen, in all our complexities and contradictions, is perhaps the greatest freedom of all.